Beloveds, we have a tradition at this church to begin our sermon with a somatic practice. I don't know about you, but today was a bit chilly, warmer than a typical fall day, but it was a little chilly, so my fingertips are a little cold. So I invite you just to rub your hands together and warm them up. Sometimes I need to rub them like this as well, because they're really cold. And then when you feel that warmth between your hands, place one hand on your chest and one on your stomach. And take a deep breath in. In your next breath, feel your chest and your stomach rise against your hands. In and out. In your next breath, release anything you may be holding this morning, anything that might be troubling you, anything that may be making you anxious, or anything that is making you feel fearful. Take a deep breath in and release. In and out. I do this when I'm anxious, just to settle my breath and my heart. And then I reach for what's in front of me. So reach and touch what's in front of you. Maybe it's the pews, maybe it's your desk if you're sitting at home, maybe it's the couch. If you're sitting down, feel the seat beneath you. Feel your feet firmly on the ground. Take a deep breath in and hold in your heart, I am safe here. In, I am safe here. And release. Heavenly God, I thank you that wherever we are, whatever we're experiencing, right now, in this moment, whether we are sitting at home or sitting here on site, or even if we're driving, God, we are safe at this moment. We are at peace. Make your presence known to us now, God, in this teaching today, and may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So, Reverend Charlene, you were talking about uncomfortable places that you had to go to, right? Well, my daughter, Misha, just celebrated her 12th birthday. And to celebrate her birthday, she told me that she would like to do an escape room experience. Has anyone ever done that before? Yeah, a couple of hands up. And for those of you that are unsure, an escape room experience is when you go to a themed room. Sometimes it's like a spaceship or a science lab, and you're locked in that room, and the only way to get out is to answer solve these puzzles and answer these questions in a really limited amount of time, usually an hour. So this is what my 12-year-old daughter wanted to do, and she wanted to do a school-themed room. No idea why. Why you'd want to celebrate your birthday in school, okay. So she wanted a school-themed room, so I got tickets for myself and her friends, and when we got to the venue to check in, we were told that another group would be joining us. A group of 20-something-year-old teachers in the school-themed room. It's not a big deal unless you're an introverted middle schooler wanting to have a very small private affair with your friends. So with a lot of apprehension, we walked into this locked room, decorated to look like a small classroom with a small playground attached. It looked fun and colorful, but also menacingly overstimulated, because you knew that in every corner and every crevice, there was a puzzle that you'd have to solve. And then when we walked in, the door shut, the red light above the door came on to indicate that the time had started, and so the middle schoolers that we were there with, the 20-something-year-old teachers had no choice but to work together in that moment to get out of that room. And it was wild, all right? It was chaotic. I mean, at one point I thought I'd lost my kids because they went down this slide and they didn't come out the other end. I was like, where did they go? And it turned out there was some like hidden room somewhere else where they appeared. It was a lot of fun, and though we were skittish as strangers at first, and we weren't sure if the presence of another group would rob us of the joy of that experience, we ended in victory. We completed all the puzzles as a group, and as uncomfortable it was for my 12-year-old daughter to share her birthday experience with a bunch of strangers, a bunch of teachers, on a Friday night, Misha and her friends, they put their heads down and they got through it. Now, today's reading, the ancient Israelites are similarly thrown into a situation that they did not plan for. And no, it wasn't as fun and colorful as an elementary school classroom. It didn't involve games or puzzles. It was war. It was invasion of their city, destruction of their temple, pillaging of their homes, and exile for part of the population. A group of the community's elites, the leaders and the priests, were snatched up and taken far from their homes, far from everything that they knew, everything that was familiar to them, exiled to Babylon. As Reverend Charlene said, the land of their enemies, plopped down amongst a community of strangers, people they didn't know, people they feared. In this chaos, in this uncertainty of what was going to happen next, those exiled were told to hunker down for the next 70 years. God says, settle down here, build houses, live in them, plant gardens, and eat what they produce. God says they'll be stuck here, and not for a 1-hour escape room experience, but for 70 years. In this next 70 years, God calls on the ancient Israelites to seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. For in its welfare, you will find your welfare. Beloveds, I don't know about you, but that is not an easy word. Let me tell you, as a person whose ancestors were forced out of their homeland, on the surface, it sounds like God is asking them to set aside hopes to return in the near future and instead accept defeat, accept their fate, maybe even accept captivity. So now I read this text with a lot of tension in my body because on the one hand, yes, I hear the promises of a future return, but it's not for another 70 years and not during one's lifetime. And so on the other hand, what it sounds like to me is that it sounds like forced assimilation. It sounds like God is urging the exiled to just go along with empire's authoritarian project, not to fight against it, not to resist it. To be honest, it sounds like what many had told the descendants of enslaved Africans to do when they were stolen from their homeland, trafficked, and sold into labor. It sounds like what many indigenous folks were told to do when colonizers were illegally settling on their land. Also, it sounds like what many immigrants are told to do to succeed here. It sounds a lot like what my mother told me to do in 2016 during the first round of ICE raids. My mother in Hong Kong was worried about my safety here because of my own immigration status at the time. So she wanted me to stop posting online about all the angry and horrible things I was saying about the person in power then. She told me, stop speaking about those raids. Just stay quiet. Don't draw any attention to yourself. This is the only way that you're going to survive. And I remember feeling so much fear and anxiety at that time. Suddenly, the tree-lined paths of Brooklyn that I walked down daily, pushing my children in their double stroller, it didn't feel safe anymore. It felt cold, and it felt dangerous. That's what exile is, when home no longer feels like home anymore. Has anyone else been there? I see a few heads nodding. We know the condition of exile is a very real state for people who are displaced because of war or political unrest. Exile is very real for people who are forced to leave everything behind because their lives are at risk or they are being targeted. It is faced by Ugandans and by Congans fleeing civil unrest, by Gazans and Ukrainians living in the state of war. So we know that exile is faced by people who are trafficked and exploited. And exile is also a condition that is faced by many when they are displaced by colonization, by climate change, by the rising cost of living, and by gentrification. Exile can also be an emotional state that makes you feel unsafe. When you're forced to leave a toxic work environment, abusive relationships, or even unhealthy churches, places that once felt safe now threaten our own well-being. Exile is something that I think every single person in this room and everyone watching online has faced at some point in your life, when your safety and security is pulled out from under you and you're sitting in limbo with nothing familiar to hold on to, uncertain of the future. In this uncomfortable place where it is cold and unwelcoming, it doesn't make sense for God to say, build here, plant seeds here, seek the peace of all these strangers. How on earth could it be possible that you might find your peace when you're trapped here in the great unknown? Jeremiah's command to seek the welfare of the city feels troubling when it's viewed as submission to empire at the expense of your own peace and welfare. But I think there's another invitation here. I don't think this is what God is inviting us to. I think there is a deeper invitation here to something new when the familiar is gone. It is an invitation to respond differently when things don't go the way we hoped or planned. In this nation, there are droves of people who have moved here from other countries, leaving their homes behind because things did not go the way they planned. There are people who are forced to move, leave jobs, relationships, and churches because things did not go the way they hoped. There are elections and votes that have taken place where there are wins and losses experienced simultaneously, creating divided camps, creating suspicion and skepticism and worry for what's to come. For half of us, this is not what we expected. And whichever camp we belong to, we get to choose how we respond to this moment. We can deepen the division by fueling hate and hostility. We can stay fearful and stay quiet, choosing not to rock the boat. We could even gloat, thinking, I told you so, thinking that we've won. But if we do, let me tell you something. We're in for an exile that's going to go far beyond our lifetime. Or we can respond differently. We can look at the strangers who we're stuck here with, and perhaps we might notice that we're all just trying to survive, just trying to make the most of the life that we have. We are all just here trying to keep the lights on, trying to keep the heat on, put food on the table, get our kids to school, get to work, and get home in one piece without getting snatched up. We are all in a collective struggle to survive here in one way or another. Our leaders might tell you that you need to fight one another to survive, magnifying threats just to justify the creation and maintenance of oppressive policies. But these are manufactured threats, and these structures only preserve a protected class at the expense of everybody else. Our leaders are emboldened and our systems are strengthened when we believe that we're part of that protected class. And we too only work for our own personal safety and survival. What God is calling us to in this passage is different. This passage is inviting us to move beyond ourself, to recognize the shared fight for survival, to see the humanity of others all around us, to see you in the needs of the other, to see your survival in the survival of the other, to see yourself in the other. In pre-colonial indigenous thinking, the Filipino concept of kapwa is the idea of the shared self. There is no concept of self as an individual. Our perception of self is always tied to the other, to our neighbors, to our community, to the collective. Thus, our need for safety is always tied to collective safety. Our need for stability is always connected to what then? Collective stability. Just checking if you're still awake. We are aware of the interconnected nature of humanity, and thus our own survival, peace, and security is never possible without considering the survival, peace, and security of who? The collective. Here in this church, in this city, in this nation, we find ourselves in a moment of exile where futures feel uncertain. The election was close. Here in New York City, we feel torn between two leaders, two different directions. This nation, torn between two parties, neither of whom have our interests in their policy making or their budget building, believe me. Some of us are exiled from a sense of belonging, even right here in our pews, in our own families, in our own communities. People are divided and they don't feel safe, stable, or secure. Now, we can continue to live fearful and suspicious, protecting our interests alone, pulling away from each other, pulling further and further away from any hope for a return to a familiar and safe feeling or home. But God is calling us to a harder and holier path, to seek a shared hope for stability, a shared hope for peace, a shared hope for security that can only be found when we seek the welfare of the city and of one another. Seek the flourishing of the other, even the one who voted differently from you, even the one whose story you don't understand, even the one whose cultures, whose tradition, whose work, whose life choices don't make any sense to you. And the hardest, seek the peace and welfare of the one who makes your blood boil. Seek their peace and their welfare. That is the spirit of Kapwa, to see their humanity as bound up with our own, to see ourselves in them, to bind their peace and welfare to our own, to believe their peace is our peace and their welfare is our welfare, their flourishing is our flourishing. Whether refugee or citizen, leader or supporter, disruptor or peaceful protester, elder or youth, clergy or congregant, we are all called to make the flourishing of the other possible. God's promise in Jeremiah, we know it really well. For surely I know the plans I have for you, plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. Contrary to popular belief, is not about your individual welfare or individual success. It's a promise that's bigger than any one individual. It beckons us to co-labor together towards a shared good for all. So wherever you find yourself in this moment, for some of you, you may be feeling like you're in the midst of exile. Or perhaps you're in a position of power, or maybe you're in the struggle. Seek the peace and welfare of others, even those who are in the struggle in your midst. For in their flourishing, we will find our own. And this is the work that we're called to by our divine Creator. This is the spirit of Kapwa. May it be so. Amen.